One person in. Do you want the muted or unmuted as they enter?
You can mute them. Okay, is it showing that we're live?
Yes. And you have one person, Donna Gaines.
Okay, great. Good morning, Donna. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you all. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Hey, Donna.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Thanks for joining.
Yes, doing what you do best. Well, among other things.
Ms. Wilson is here from Sankofa. And Mark, you may remember her if you haven't been in touch with her since I was with NLCCC. Remember you came to Lawndale and spoke with NLCCC?
Sure.
You were in Ms. Wilson's space.
Well, thank you for your hospitality, Ms. Wilson.
Good morning. Good morning. All right, so we are going to get started. All right, my name is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. We have a vision of training the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders, and we do that through forums like these. We do it through consulting as well as online courses. If you have been joining us over the past month or so, you know that this month we're focusing on social enterprise. We've already taken you through a series of what we would call basic steps of looking at your business model, testing it for feasibility, sharing tips with you as to how to pitch. Today, we are going to have another practical lesson. We're going to be focusing on legal structures for not only your nonprofit, but your nonprofit as it relates to your social enterprise, or shall I say social enterprise as it relates to your nonprofit. You might be a nonprofit manager who is considering working with your organization to go into social enterprise. And if that is you, you're in the right place. All right, so today's guest is Marc J. Lane. He is the owner and founder of the Marc J. Lane Wealth Group. Among other things, if you go to his website, you'll see that his wealth group is very, very helpful in a number of issues that you might have in nonprofit, in addition to social enterprise. We don't have time to go into all of that, but I do want to let you know he is foremost authority in the world on social enterprise and other issues of nonprofit as it relates to organizational structure, governance, and all of that good stuff. So without further ado, I am going to bring Marc on, and I know that one of the things he is really interested in is the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation. And before we get started on, social enterprise per se, we are going to hear a little bit more about his background and the Cook County Commission on Social Enterprise and what they've been doing lately and their impact to the community. All right, Marc.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, Valerie. It's a pleasure to be with you and your guests. The Cook County Commission on Social Innovation is a unique effort nationally. It is a permanent agency of county government. I was privileged to draft the legislation creating the commission.
Mm-hmm.
And it's charged with the responsibility of incubating actionable social policy recommendations for consideration by the Cook County Board. And over the years, we've done lots of interesting things, lots of impactful things. I'll identify a few and tell you kind of what's in the cards for 2022 as well. One of the things that's particularly interesting to me is that Cook County is the only government unit in the nation, so far as I know, to offer nonprofits and social enterprises, L3Cs, benefit corporations, a preference in procurements when they are seeking to sell goods or services to the county or any of its instrumentalities. So they get a 5% improvement on their bids. I
Wow.
drafted that law. It was picked up on by Forbes. And the idea here is really to encourage all economic sectors, government and non-government, to source goods and services from mission-driven ventures, thereby really elevating supply chains to value chains. And I think that's an important way that communities can be served as businesses seek to expand what corporate social responsibility means, as government becomes more impactful, serving as a convener, a collaborator, and a catalyst. We also, in the commission, enacted a good food purchasing policy. There are many of those around the country. What's different about ours is that it's the first to include social equity considerations. So it calls upon the county, and this has teeth, to make available to women and minorities, to nonprofit organizations, underutilized county real estate and lands for farming, for food processing, again, flexing that public muscle for the public good. This year, we're off to the races. We've already had an initiative presented to the commission, which is now under advisement, that would seek to bring to Cook County community investment trusts. These are a specialized legal form that would invite people within disadvantaged communities to invest small amounts of money in real estate and businesses on a no-loss basis, and thereby seeking to bridge the wealth gap. And that's underway. We're working with Mercy Corps in Portland, Oregon to help make that happen here. We're also working with the Obama Foundation, seeking to build upon the model they're using to create a talents pipeline for minority tradesmen, in their case, particularly associated with the construction of the presidential center. But we're going to be doing is spreading the word to ensure that developers of all stripes around the county and beyond can replicate that model, tweak it for their own purposes, and expand their talent pool for the benefit of all of us, but also for the benefit of those individuals who otherwise might face barriers in employment. Later in the year, we already have scheduled Mayor Daniel Biss of Evanston to talk about what they're doing, which is very innovative in exploring reparations. And they're providing special economic consideration to people whose forebears suffered from Jim Crow within Evanston. And I want to see how it's obviously going to be a provocative conversation, somewhat controversial. On the other hand, I think it's something worth exploring and looking at what kinds of models might work here, both fiscally and from the perspective of social impact. So my leadership in the Cook County Commission is something I deeply value, and I think you can look forward to further outcomes that are going to be leveraged throughout the nation, perhaps around the world. So thanks for asking the question.
Okay, awesome. And speaking of questions, we're going to do something a little different. Anybody who has listened to any one of these live streams, I typically wait and hold Q&A until the end, but Marc has been so gracious as to welcome questions as we go along. So if there are any questions about the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation before we get started into our discussion on social enterprise, let's have at it. Okay. Doesn't look like we have any questions. So, Marc, in the very basic form, what exactly how would you define a social enterprise?
Yeah, that's a trickier question than you might assume. Because when I wrote the American Bar Association treatise on social enterprise, I think I devoted 4 pages at the very beginning, kind of reporting on the various definitions people are using. I'm not a great fan of labels. I think they tend to divide us. So
Mhm.
let me keep to the basics here.
Okay.
A social enterprise is, in the first instance, an enterprise. So it is a business, whether that is a freestanding social purpose venture or whether it is a nonprofit that is looked at its core competencies and underutilized assets and found opportunities to create earned revenue, affording it the ability to become less dependent on government contracts and government grants, less dependent on philanthropy, all of which is becoming less reliable, and create a business that itself drives mission. So we have an enterprise, meaning a business, and again, I'm agnostic as to form, but then it's a social enterprise, meaning that its significant or principal purpose is to drive social change. And many of them will have their own theories of social change that they either will be testing or have already validated. So that would be my explanation, and I think that's a broad explanation, and I would encourage the adoption of a broad application for the term, unless it's being employed to comply with a specific statute or regulation or grant or contract.
Mhm. Awesome, awesome. So what piqued your interest to work in that particular space in the first place?
Well, it wasn't always so. I am a corporate and tax attorney, a master registered financial planner. And for the first many years of my practice, I was privileged to represent high income, high net worth individuals around the country, around the world, and their
Mhm.
businesses, and still do that.
Mhm.
Many people whose names you will know continue to flatter me with their confidence. But 15 years ago or so, I pivoted into the evolving social impact ecosystem. And the history is simply this. I was a child of the 60s. I was the kid out there in the early civil rights movements, the Green movement, the gay and lesbian movement, the anti-Vietnam movement. I was protesting, advocating, and once that's part of your DNA, you don't lose that. And as I found that my practice became increasingly sophisticated, I had all kinds of people in my orbit, I thought, gee, why not take the opportunity to kind of deploy those skills for the social good? So while maintaining that existing client base and indeed expanding it, I have moved into social impact, and today our law firm represents, I'm sure, more social enterprises and probably more nonprofits than any other law firm in the country. But that's the history. It's a personal history, which has become a professional history. And I'm one of the blessed ones where one's personal life and professional life are so absolutely aligned that there's no distinction between the two. And I'm deeply grateful for that.
Okay, awesome, awesome. James, I see that you had a question in chat. You want to ask your question yourself?
Attorney Lane, thank you so much.
My pleasure, James.
That community investment trust model that
Yes.
you are implementing,
Yes.
that's a beautiful model. I haven't heard of anybody that has attacked it from a legal perspective. And I was wondering if there's any opportunity to replicate the strategies that you and your group have constructed and have that be your intellectual property, but implemented in a state like I'm in Florida, and we definitely need that tool down here.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, and it's an important one. This is one example of several on which I've worked and continue to work to really attract investment capital from folks who otherwise would not be expected to contribute it. I spearheaded the state's first Pay for Success initiative, which is another example of impact investment where external institutional investors fund interventions, experimental social programs, and they get a return on their investment predicated upon the social success of the intervention. And that's working very well. That one happened, the one which I worked, which was the state's first, dealt with kids who were among the most troubled kids in our state, those who are involved in both the criminal justice and juvenile welfare systems, also very much involved in the Opportunity Zone initiative, where people now, based on their own self-interest, wealthy people seeking to avoid and defer tax, now find reason to put money into communities and lift up people, lift up those communities, attract businesses to those communities, contribute to the tax base, and so on. So yeah, if you would please send me an email, I'll see if I can help you out in Florida, and I'd love to do whatever I can to make that happen down there as well. My email address is mlane, M-L-A-N-E, at marcjlane, marcjlane.com. And if I can be helpful to you, it would be I'd be thrilled to do so, because, you know, all of these ideas really are about thought leadership. And it isn't enough to do something here or there. All of these things become models that can be scaled up and rolled out, or else they really don't fulfill their purpose. So to the extent we can do this in other states, that would be, and I do, you know, I'm sure we do most of this stuff around many things I'm talking about all over the country already. So to the extent you have an interest in community investment trusts, I'll be delighted to support that effort. Thank you for
awesome.
your interest and your leadership.
Thank you, sir.
Of course.
All righty. Ricky, I saw that your hand was up before you changed computers. Did you have a question?
Yes, kind of a question and a comment. I just had to raise my hand. Mark said something, the statement he made, he said that he is lucky and he is happy that his personal life and his business life totally align with each other. And that spoke to my heart right there. Because Val, you know what we're involved. That is my ultimate goal. And man, I'm trying to get anything I can about a Mark, just with him saying those words, because I mean, hopefully moving forward, I'll be able to share a lot more of my story so you understand. But I am now currently involved, like with Miss Valerie. We're working on some grants, but ultimately, that is my life's goal. I am actually a recent returning citizen. I spent 23 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, and I've been out 6 months now. And I've currently, I'm in partnership with a lot of different organizations and individuals with my partner, who's also on here, Mr. Michael Cannon. And long story short, to try to sum it up, man, we spent a whole lot of years, you know, behind those walls, you know, rehabilitating ourselves and thinking of solutions that we can apply to our community. And now we are blessed to be in a position to do that. And we've combined, you know, one of my dreams was always becoming a social entrepreneur. That was my dream. I wanted to be a social entrepreneur. So we're at the point where we're putting together all of these ideas, some for-profit, some non-for-profit, and we're trying to blend them and go about the best way of creating that. And ultimately to get to the goal, like you said, of creating that synergy and that alignment where our passion, you know, is also our sustenance. And I'm going to be listening to every word you drop from here moving forward, because it sounds like you got the keys. So I'm here to listen, man. And I hope we can connect in some way.
Ricky, if I've got the keys are you and Michael. So I wish you all the best, and thank you for those very generous words. I should tell you that there are many returning citizens who have become highly successful social entrepreneurs. We are honored to represent many of them, and I wish you best in your endeavors. This is hard work, but I know you will find it worthwhile.
Okay. Awesome, awesome. So what are some of the common structures for social enterprise?
Well, form follows function.
Mhm,
So there are, first of all, a social enterprise can take any form.
mhm,
It can be a nonprofit that becomes enterprising in its own right, directly or through a subsidiary. And there are some particular entity designs that are most suitable for subsidiaries or affiliates of nonprofits. We might talk about those. But then there are freestanding for-profit social purpose businesses, and it could be a corporation, it could be a limited liability company, or it can be one of the emerging social enterprise forms that are tailored one way or another to this specific objective. Among them are the low profit limited liability company and the benefit corporation. So it's, again, it's a case of what fits from a tax, governance, and funding perspective. Those tend to be the three criteria. And beyond that, the social enterprise forms offer some branding advantage, positioning, signaling to those necessary or desirable stakeholders. And we could talk about each of these if you wish, but I'll defer to you
mhm.
on that.
Okay, I would love for you to unpack it, but if there are any questions from our audience before you start unpacking, that would be great. Any questions? All righty. So Mark, let her rip. Oh, Ricky, you had a
Ricky's
question.
got something here. Let's come back to Ricky.
Yeah,
Ricky, you're on mute.
you're mute. Oh, I apologize. I said, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be that guy, but when I tell you, Mr. Lane is hitting on some of the stuff, and you know, Val, we was just having this conversation about a week ago, talking about B corporations and social enterprises, and that's something that I'm very curious because I understand that B corporations are fairly new, right? And you have to get some type of certification for them. My question, because as soon as I heard about it, I'm like, that sounds like what I'm looking for right there. That sounds like exactly, because it melded the two, and the primary drive wasn't simply, stakeholders and the financial impact. So what is the reasonableness? I guess my question is, what is the reasonable of being able to obtain that certification, and for a regular individual to be able to go out and obtain a B certification? Like
Okay.
this weekend, last week, for a program we're working on, a project, I went out and obtained a LLC for some transitional housing. But I thought about it, like after I did it, like that might not have been the vehicle that I needed. So my question is, like, how reasonable is it obtaining that B certification or one of these other structures that'll best fit what we're trying to do?
Okay, well, let's break that down. First, I had been mentioning various entity designs, right? A B Corp is not an entity design. A B Corp is a brand. You see the B in a circle sometimes. That is reflective of the entity, irrespective of its form, meeting certain criteria to earn the right to display that trademark. So, and it is available to any for-profit business, whether that be an LLC, a corporation, an L3C, a benefit corporation. The B in a circle signals that your entity will have satisfied the rigorous sustainability requirements or mandated by a nonprofit organization called B Lab. And it's a self designation. And it's you score your company based upon diversity, environmental compliance, various criteria. And if your score adds up to a number that's high enough to qualify, you're eligible to display that B in a circle, and that you are thereby eligible to call yourself a B Corp. What's a little tricky about it is it's called B Corp, even though it may not, in fact, be a corporation at all. So many L3Cs, for example, are B Corps. Well, L3Cs are not corporations. They're limited liability companies, which is a different animal altogether. So your question about B Corps is a slight departure from entity design, although it's a very important question. One, because of the branding advantage of the B Corp that some people find. And two, because of the confusion in the marketplace between a B Corp and a benefit corporation, the latter being a form of entity. And the names being so similar, people do get confused about, well, which is which and what does each mean? So I'm glad you've asked the question. So that's the B Corp. So Valerie, where would you like to go from here?
I see Michael Cannon,
Right.
yeah, has a question, and then we
Okay.
can take it from there.
Sure.
Yes, just briefly, Mark, I'd like to thank you for this discourse that you're giving. Like Ricky, he said a lot of what I was going to say, but I too am a returning resident, and we are involved in numerous things like he mentioned. And you, again, I'm mimicking him really because you are really talking our language. We know what we know, but we know what we don't know. And this is the part that we don't know. We do not want to make a misstep in what we're doing and what we're currently engaged in with our partners, and what we're doing socially and for profit is so important that I'd like to touch down with you if possible. I know you said your email, but we are going down the stretch with Valerie and what we're doing, and we want to come out the door the right way, and so if we can by any way speak with you and facilitate that, then that would be great.
Please reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you in any way I can. I could say, however, if you're working with Valerie, you're already on the right track.
Thank you. I take that as a huge compliment. We can just stop
It's
now.
intended as a compliment. I don't know how huge it is, but it's from the heart.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So we already talked about the B Corp, and you mentioned L3C. How is that different from an LLC or a C Corp?
Okay, so let's put C Corp off the table because an LLC is not a corporation at all.
Okay.
And the L3C is a kind of LLC, okay?
Oh, got
So an LLC is a limited liability company. Limited liability companies are the most popular for-profit business forms in the United States. And the reason for that is they insulate their owners from the debts of the enterprise. So if you put in $1,000 into your LLC, that's all you could lose. If there's a lawsuit, you're not on the hook, okay?
Mhm.
Minor exceptions relating to payroll taxes, but that's incidental.
Okay.
The second reason LLCs are so popular is they have great flexibility in how they're governed. They can either be a hierarchical governance structure where you have a manager who runs the place, which can be an individual, can be a corporation unto itself as created, or it can be the owners of the LLC who are called members. So then you have a participatory democracy. So it has flexibility in the way it's governed. And third, it has flexibility from the perspective of how it pays tax. It can either pay its own tax at corporate rates, or it can be disregarded for tax purposes, where its income or loss flows through to the tax return of its owner. In the early go, many organizations are not, do not have taxable income because of startup costs, because of artificial accounting losses that can be created. So frequently it makes sense for the entity to be a disregarded entity for tax purposes, at least in the early go. So those losses can flow through to the owner, offsetting income from other sources like employment.
Okay, question,
So that-
Mark. Mark, question for you. So if you're a disregarded entity, does that mean that you have the same, the LLC is on your social security number versus a separate EIN? You know, what triggers it being a disregarded entity?
It has to do with the election that the LLC makes on its, when it files its own taxes.
Okay,
So that's all LLC. So it has an asset protection advantage. It has governance flexibility, and it has tax flexibility. And indeed, it can
Okay.
switch from one tax status to another. So as the entity becomes profitable in its own right, the owner may say, hey, I don't want to pay a tax on that anymore. Let's have the entity pay its tax. So there's really a lot of flexibility. That's the LLC. Everything I've just described will also apply to an L3C, which is merely a kind of LLC. The L3C, however, has some additional features. It is required by law to pursue a charitable or educational purpose. It also tracks the federal tax requirements that are imposed on foundations for the grants that they make. So let's take a step back here. Foundations, in exchange for the tax benefits they enjoy, meaning tax deductible money going into it, and any earnings they realize being tax exempt, all of that is given to the foundation in exchange for the expectation that the foundation will kick out money every year. Today, the law says foundations must kick out at least 5% of their assets every year, which is generally accommodated through grants, and mostly through grants to nonprofits. This is what accounts for the feverish competition for grants among charities. But the law doesn't limit that 5% distribution to grants. And indeed, foundations may instead make an investment, as long as the investment is made for charitable or educational purposes. And therefore, it could make an investment even a for-profit entity, which is what, on the face of it, an L3C is. So we have an entity that by statute must pursue permanently and irrevocably a charitable or educational purpose that attracts stakeholders of all stripes who buy into mission. So you don't find yourself in a situation where investors or others are operating at cross purposes. And further, it facilitates capital formation because it is designed to attract foundation grants or the specialized form of investments called program-related investments. It also obviously has a branding advantage because you're now holding yourself out to the world as a social enterprise, and therefore will be regarded more highly than a competitor or a perceived competitor who isn't charitable in function. So that's the L3C. It has a capital formation advantage, a governance advantage, and a branding advantage. That works for a freestanding for-profit social purpose venture, but it also works for an L3C that decides to create a business. I'm sorry, let me back up. It also works for a nonprofit that wishes to create a business. Council will recommend that that business be held in a separate legal entity. So if there's some problem with the business, it doesn't boomerang against the nonprofit. And in creating that subsidiary, the advantage of using an L3C is there is no daylight between the mission of the nonprofit that owns it and the L3C that's pursuing a commercial strategy, because that commercial strategy must itself be charitable or educational. Consequently, third parties looking in aren't going to question, well, why the heck are you running a business? Well, the answer is we're running a business which is cohesively managed with the parent nonprofits in furtherance of the nonprofit's mission, and by law must pursue that mission, okay? And so it has that advantage from kind of an optical point of view, but also from a managerial point of view, the nonprofit's management is not schizophrenic, trying to run a nonprofit and some business that could act in a way that's antithetical to the mission of the parent. The other advantage of the L3C is, unlike having a corporate subsidiary, for example, the L3C, so long as its earnings further the exempt purpose of the parent nonprofit, those earnings too are tax exempt. So even though we have an entity that had it sit outside the nonprofit in the rest of the world would pay a tax on its earnings, by virtue of it being owned by the nonprofit, it escapes tax. And therefore, that would not be the case with a corporation. A corporation would have to pay a tax on its income. So using an L3C subsidiary avoids tax, thereby improving the after-tax return on investments that can be either reinvested in the L3C for growth or distributed to the parent nonprofit to be deployed programmatically, or a combination of the two. So I know I said a lot, and it is a lot, and there's some complexity attached to it and some nuance. So maybe we have a question or two. I wouldn't be surprised.
Michael Cannon, did you have your hand raised?
I did, but I'll hold. I'm like the sponge here, just getting it. I do not want to stop his flow. This L3C thing is exactly what we've been trying to figure out. And I don't want to stop his flow. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question as you were talking. So we talked about how, I guess, nonprofits can have an L3C as a subsidiary, but if the L3C is a standalone entity, and I guess, well, can it distribute earnings to the owners legally if it's a standalone entity?
Okay, so yeah, then you're outside of nonprofit world, right? You're just having entrepreneurs who are social entrepreneurs. They're looking for both financial returns and social returns. They can set up an L3C that they own, and it's treated like any other LLC. The income gets distributed to them when they want to take it, or they continue to let it ride within the L3C and allow it to grow using those funds. So those are two different patterns. Now there's a third, well, there are actually many other patterns, but I'll mention one other, and that is, it's a little tricky, but it's doable to have an L3C and a nonprofit be strategic partners, where they have transactions between them, but the L3C is privately owned, not owned by the nonprofit. It does trigger issues about conflict of interest, self-dealing, private inurement, private benefit. So there's lots of stuff that has to be sorted through, but in certain circumstances, that becomes the ideal way to play it. And I'll give you one example where that might come into play. And that is a minority business enterprise or women's business enterprise or veterans-owned enterprise. A nonprofit-owned L3C doesn't qualify for any of those. So by having the entity owned by one or more individuals who are in that protected class, you can get corporate contracts, government contracts, and so on. And there are relationships that might be established with the nonprofit or other nonprofits operating in tandem with the L3C.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Cannon, you had another hand raised?
Yes. Okay, my question is, like we have some current LLCs, but it seems like that's the way to go. So would it be hard for us to convert the LLC over, or would we just have to just start over with an L3C?
Okay, without opining as to your comment that this is the way to go, because I have no idea whether it is or it isn't, but just answering your logistics question. The LC can be amended into an L3C. It's a charter amendment. And then it needs to register with the Attorney General because it is subject to the Charitable Trust Act. It is scrutinized the same way a charity is, which, by the way, is I wrote the L3C law, and I did that by design because I wanted foundations who didn't know about the L3C at that point to gain comfort that the form is regulated as a charity is. That breaks down defenses, allowing them more readily to make grants or investments in the form. But those are the principal steps. There may be implications for bylaws or other governance instrument, but essentially from a public perspective, it would be dealing with the Secretary of State through a charter amendment and the Attorney General with registration and compliance under the Charitable Trust Act. So, you don't have to scrap what you have and start anew. You have an entity that can easily be transitioned into an L3C.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you were talking about conflicts of interest, I thought about governance structure. So if you have a nonprofit that has an L3C as a subsidiary, how might that governance structure look, I guess, for each of the entities and then some holding entity as a whole?
So no conflict of interest is implicated so long as the nonprofit is the 100% owner of the subsidiary. It's an asset of the nonprofit and it's governed pursuant to the board of the nonprofit, whether directly or indirectly through a manager who would be reportable to the board. So there's no conflicts because there's no adverse party. Once the L3C receives investment, if the investment takes the form of debt, again, no conflict of interest. The debt is memorialized contractually through a loan agreement and note. If, however, the investment coming into the L3C is an equity investment, that is, a third party becomes an owner of the L3C, whether that be a foundation that takes equity or a socially conscious individual, or even a financial first investor or others. Obviously, at that point, there is a question about how that relationship is protected to ensure that the board and its officers and directors meet their fiduciary obligations, so that there is no private benefit to those third parties beyond reasonable returns for that which they're placing at risk. And there are different mechanisms by which that is accounted for. The one thing I should tell you, which is actually very helpful, is that when the L3C owned by a nonprofit takes in equity owners, the law will require the nonprofit to have control of that subsidiary. So that issue's off the table when negotiating with the foundation or other equity investors. So you're only starting with economics rather than governance. The governance can be there, they can sit on a board, but they can't have control of the board, which in my view greatly simplifies the governance decisions for the nonprofit when seeking to bring equity investment into the sub.
Okay, awesome. So
Valerie?
yes, ma'am.
Just letting you know, we're 15 minutes until closeout.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Mark, when you're meeting with boards, who are considering starting a social enterprise, what are some of the things you might advise them to do, as they assess whether or not this is a good move for them?
Yeah, I'll take a step back if I may.
Okay.
Before meeting with the board, I'll want a champion within the entity because somebody who gets it, understands why it's being done, understands that there are precedents for this. We have something well north of 2,000 L3Cs around the country now. because boards, especially nonprofit boards, understandably are very cautious. And you start talking to them about businesses, let alone L3Cs, and their defenses pop up. So it's important to have somebody who is deeply respected by the board, maybe a board member, it may be the executive director, maybe some other person, maybe a donor, who is shepherding through the idea. Then I would like to meet with the board and explain how this works, why it works, how it's beneficial, but also identify any concerns or risks or compliance obligations that would arise should they move in that direction, affording the board the opportunity to get off their minds any concerns that they have so that those can be successfully addressed before moving forward. When the board then blesses this in principle, then I like to work with a smaller number of people who may be a task force of the board, maybe the executive director, maybe the president. And those are people that are really going to work through the issues with me to make sure we end up with the best possible outcome, both from a design perspective and an implementation perspective, so as to have the greatest probability of financial success in terms of sustainability and the greatest possibility of optimizing social impact.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is you're not just looking at this from a legal standpoint, you're looking at it from a financial feasibility standpoint, operationally, and all of that good stuff.
And strategic and tactical.
Okay.
You know, this has, they're inevitably, as anyone starting a new business will face, there are lots of moving parts. So and I'm a process guy, I tend to move from the general to the specific. We need to understand what are the steps sequentially, one foot in front of another to get you where you want to go. I like to look at what they perceive to be their ultimate view of success. That obviously changes over time based on all kinds of serendipitous factors. But then predicated on what success looks like, we reverse engineer to where we are today and identify, okay, how do we get from here to there? What's the first thing we do? What's the second thing we do? And it becomes building blocks.
Okay.
And we want it to be sufficiently nimble and sufficiently flexible to adapt without throwing the structure out the window should new opportunities present themselves or be cultivated. Because inevitably, and we've learned this from COVID, if nothing else, opportunities and challenges come at you when you least expect them. And you have to have your entity structure positioned in a way to accommodate them and take advantage of the opportunities and overcome the crises should they emerge.
Okay. Are there any questions from the audience before I ask my question? All righty. It doesn't look like, I don't see any hands up. I don't see any questions. All righty. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you have seen nonprofits make who want to take on a social enterprise?
I guess I'll answer it in a general way first. Inadequate planning. I would say that about any business launch. Not really anticipating what might go wrong, how long it might take, how hard it is to get funding. Is there a theory of social change that others will buy into? Has that been adequately vetted and empirically demonstrated? Because social entrepreneurs are passionate people. They are inspired, they're excited. They recognize, as I do, that time is our enemy. People are suffering unless and until problems are successfully addressed. So there is an urgency, there is an eagerness. We can't let that urgency and eagerness come at the expense of taking the necessary steps one after another as you would in any business, but now colored by the special requirements of tax exemption, statutory compliance, protection of intellectual property, compliance with Attorney General requirements, testing the market. All the things that are relevant here are things that are relevant in any business launch, but now we got lots of others on top of them that inform them. So I think it's a case of not allowing excitement and commitments stand in the way of the planning that is necessary to avoid failure. The other thing I'll say, and this may come as some surprise, often these things fail. As any business, in most cases, will fail. The goal is to fail soon. Learn your lessons. If something isn't working, either abandon it and move on, or see what you could tweak to make it work. Information is your friend. Failure is not a personal attack on your intelligence or commitment. Quite the contrary. It's a testament to your leadership. It's showing that you know what to do with information, because many of our social enterprises are highly successful. You too may know their names around the country, and they continue to grow and scale up and encourage and empower others to follow suit as to missions that are important to them. But there are others that haven't made it. And I always say, look, whatever you think your mission is, thought leadership is part of your mission. Let it be known what happened and why. Don't be opaque, be transparent. If social enterprise isn't about transparency and accountability, it isn't about anything at all. So let others know what happened so they won't make the same mistakes. They will learn from your experiences. And when you get it right, which you will, let that empower them to move forward, because they will see, yeah, things don't always work out instantly, but there is always a path as long as the mission is important and management has the smarts and the commitments and knows how to make it happen with the right support.
No, that's awesome. All right, I know I have a question, but I'm going to defer to the audience since we're getting so close to the end time. Anybody have any questions so far? James.
Attorney Lane,
Yes, sir.
you're blowing me away with all the information that you're sharing and identifying all the problems that I've made. Is there a possibility that your services could be written into a grant that I'm pursuing so the funder knows that there's some wise counsel to back up?
Well, this is an area for Valerie to help you with. There are planning grants available, whether you are eligible for one. I don't know enough about your situation, but there is such an animal. I do want to kind of comment on your starting point, and that is all the mistakes you made. You didn't make any mistakes. We don't look backward. We look forward. And everything that was done for a reason at the time. Don't beat yourself up about that. Let's just get it right going forward.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions? Is your hand still up, James? Okay. All right. Yeah, I heard you mention, Mark, social theory of change, making sure that your business has a social theory of change. And it's interesting that you didn't mention value proposition. Can you first explain the difference between the two, and why was it more important to you to focus on social theory of change versus value proposition?
I think both are indispensable. So let's start there.
Okay.
Theory of social change has to do with your approach to a social problem does in fact ameliorate that problem. And you only do that empirically. You can do it theoretically, but you got to do it on the ground. You have to have pilots, you have to test, because then you have evidence to go to a foundation or others and say, look, this works. We now need it funded. Okay, that's what that's about.
Mhm.
Value proposition, the L3C, for example, is a creature of identifying diverse value propositions for all of your necessary and desirable stakeholders who may have different objectives, some social, some financial, some blended, but it galvanizes all of them around mission, giving each the benefit of its bargain. So part of the trick of designing an L3C successfully is identifying who are your necessary and desirable stakeholders, what's in it for each of them, recognizing they may be after different things, but that in no means suggests that they're after things that are in conflict with one another. They are inevitably things that are complementary to one another. And that's what we're able to put together. That's what the L3C is known for, given its tranched or layered capital structure, where often a foundation or other non-dilutive or concessionary funding de-risks the investment for others who come in concurrently or subsequently, all the way up through and including institutional investors who care only about money.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Ricky, I thought I saw your hand up. Is it still up?
Yes. Man, uh, Mark, Mark is amazing, man. Mark is amazing. So,
I'll tell my wife.
no, like, it's funny because when I raised my hand, you can't.
Ricky, we
My,
can't.
Breaking up, Ricky.
can you still hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
We're just now starting to hear you, Ricky.
Okay, well, my first initial thought, something sparked in my mind. It had me thinking about the first business class that I took, and when I seen how, it seemed like in the business world they were talking about, moving towards that, removing just that bottom line that evolved around money. And it seems like I've seen an evolution. I'm pretty young. You know what I'm saying? As I'm young, I'm seeing this. I was surprised when I seen it in the business book. And then I started to see it a little bit more over time. And then, like I said, I came across an article in a Black Enterprise, and it introduced me to the idea of a social entrepreneur. But I understand that Mark has been about this, as they say, about this life. Mark has been about this life since the 60s. So I wonder, how does this feel in your view, from already having this viewpoint that everything should be guided from that core principle of helping others or what's right to everyone? How does it feel seeing that this seems like that arc of the universe is like moving a little bit more? Because that's what it's looking like to me. Maybe I'm naive because I'm so young and I'm just seeing it from such a small viewpoint. But as somebody who's been doing this and been seeing the world through this view so much, how does that look to you?
Thanks, Ricky. It's a journey, and we are evolving from a world where business seeks to maximize short-term financial profits for its shareholders to a world where business is called upon to be accountable to all of its stakeholders, not only its shareholders, but its employees, its customers, its community, the environment. And that movement is market-driven. Employees will not go to work for companies whose culture does not consider all of those stakeholders. Customers favor businesses who are good corporate citizens. Supply chain issues now are looking at diversity and inclusion policies and practices, all by demand of those players who have the right to demand vis-a-vis the company. So it's getting there. We're not there yet entirely, but we're moving in that direction, and social enterprise is that bridge.
Valerie, it's 11.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, I'm gonna do this Baptist close. I said we were closing after Ricky. Michael, you get the last question. No questions, or you just got a comment? I see your hand raised. You're on
I
mute.
just wanted to make a quick comment, man, because you speak to our heart. Ricky and I, we are restorative justice practitioners. And so everything we do is look at through the lens with a holistic approach, and to see this in the business world and us in the midst of doing this, man, it is so exciting. And to be talking to the guy who wrote the law on it is such a blessing. And I appreciate you, and I look forward to speaking with you again, and God willing, real soon.
Well, thank you very much.
I
And
thank
again,
you all.
I wish
Thank
you
you,
all the
God.
best and thank you for
Thank
your
you.
leadership. Good. God put you here for a reason.
All righty. So I want to say thank you so much to Mark Lane. Let's give him a hand. We thank you so much for your time and effort. And I tell you, I've never heard an attorney speak with so much passion about social enterprise or any business topic for that matter. So thank you so much for
My
sharing
pleasure.
your heart.
Thanks again for inviting me, Valerie. Wonderful to be with you and your
All right.
guests.
All righty. And John, you haven't said anything. We're getting ready to leave. Did you have a comment? Thank you so much for joining us from Texas.
I think he was applauding.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was an applause. I thought that I just saw a hand. All righty. And Donna Gaines says, thank you so much. I just want to thank each of you for taking time from your President's Day to join us, and make this a really, really fulfilling conversation.
Great
All right. So
conversation.
yes. So if you have time on Wednesday, we're going to come back again. We're going to speak with some folks in the field who are actually practitioners who are running social enterprise. We won't be in the Zoom room, but we will be streaming live from 16 different channels. So if you're available on Wednesday at this time, Wednesday at 10 o'clock, be sure to join us on your favorite social media channel, through Nonprofit Utopia. All righty. Take care. And
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye. Deborah, it was great to see you. And John, great to see you.
Hi, Valerie. I hope you're going to be able to send this recording. I was listening, but needed to, be off camera. So I apologize for that. I really don't like to do that, but, forgive me this time.
Oh, please. You're beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. In
Yeah,
person and picture and all that stuff.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, the recording will definitely be available. I can make it available, within minutes. We're going to be editing it. Oh, you're outside of Chicago. We're going to edit it for production with Can TV, and it'll come out on Can TV in a couple months, but it'll be available on YouTube immediately. So
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. All right. Hugs to you.
hug.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Willie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. She is beautiful. The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, she's from New Jersey. She lived in Chicago about 20 or 30 years. She used to work for the Park District and did some work with, I know Alderman Chandler.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think if she was in the party. So you may have.
Now, just a moment. I still see live on custom live streaming service. Do you need to cancel that?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. One of us is observant.